My daughter said it at Sunday dinner, right there at the table where I taught her to hold a fork. She was 34 years old, dressed in the kind of clothes that cost more than my first truck, and she looked across the roasted chicken and the good linen napkins I'd ironed that morning, looked straight at me and said, "Dad, honestly, Marcus has done more for my life in 3 years than you did in 30. You're just a man who fixed other people's broken things his whole life. Marcus builds things. There's a difference." Her fiancé, Marcus Webb, sat beside her with a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face like a man watching a horse race he'd already bet on. He lifted his wine glass, just barely, not a toast, just a tilt the way a king acknowledges a servant who finally said the thing the king had been thinking for years. "My daughter's name is Claire. She is, and always has been, the best thing I ever made." And that evening, in the dining room of the home I built with my own hands in Knoxville, Tennessee, she had no idea that she was sitting inside a life I had quietly engineered down to the last nail. I am Raymond Aldrich. I am 66 years old. I spent 38 years as a civil engineer, and when people ask me what that means, I tell them it means I am the person who makes sure the thing you're standing on does not fall. Bridges, overpasses, foundations, the invisible work that holds the visible world upright. And that Sunday evening, when Claire slid her chair back and followed Marcus to the living room, I sat alone at the table with the uneaten food still steaming, and I felt something settle inside me like concrete finding its level. Not rage, not grief, something colder and more precise. The recognition that I had been patient for 3 years too long, and that the most loving thing I could do now was the hardest thing I had ever done. I want to take you through exactly what happened, because this story deserves to be told slowly. And somewhere in the middle of it, I want you to ask yourself what you would have done if you were sitting in my chair. I need to go back a few years before that dinner so you understand the full weight of what Claire said. Her mother, Diane, and I divorced when Claire was 26. It was not a war. It was a slow, quiet erosion, two people who had become strangers inside a shared address. Diane moved to Scottsdale. I stayed in Knoxville. Claire stayed close to me for the first year after the divorce, calling twice a week, stopping by on Sundays. I thought we were solid. Then she met Marcus Webb at a conference in Nashville. Marcus is 41. He has excellent hair, a firm handshake, and an effortless way of filling a room that I recognized immediately as a performance. He runs what he calls a boutique development consultancy, which, as far as I could tell, meant he advised small companies on growth strategy and charged them a great deal for the privilege. He drove a Range Rover. He wore watches that were meant to be noticed. He had the specific confidence of a man who had never once been responsible for something that could fall down and kill people. From the moment Claire introduced us, Marcus had a way of speaking to me that I can only describe as generous condescension. He called me sir, with just enough emphasis to make it sound like old man. He praised my house, classic bones, great craftsmanship, the way a developer praises a neighborhood he's about to gentrify. He asked me once, at an early dinner, whether I'd ever considered moving somewhere a little more suited to retirement. I was 63. I was still working. Claire changed around him. Not overnight, gradually, the way a riverbank erodes. She stopped calling twice a week. Sunday visits became monthly, then occasional. She started talking about Marcus's deals, Marcus's clients, Marcus's vision. She said the word vision so many times it lost its shape. I said nothing. I am, by nature, a quiet man. Diane used to say, I communicated in load-bearing silences. She wasn't wrong, but I was watching. And what I was watching concerned me deeply. Because what Claire did not know, what Marcus did not know, what almost no one knew, was this. 3 years before that Sunday dinner, when Claire had come to me with a trembling business plan for a boutique interior design firm she wanted to launch, I had done something that I told myself was love, and now understood was also, quietly, a test. She had a concept, real talent, and exactly zero capital. Marcus, who she'd been dating for 8 months at that point, had encouraged her to seek investors. She'd approached 2 firms and been turned away. She came to me and asked if I knew anyone who might believe in her. I told her I would ask around. I did not ask around. I called my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Osei who had handled my estate planning for 15 years and who I trusted with the kind of information that could change lives. Together, in the span of 2 weeks, we set up a small, private investment entity, a limited liability company registered in Delaware. with a neutral name that meant nothing. Clearwater Creative Partners. We funded it with $400,000 from my savings. We hired a semi-retired design school professor named Howard Bain to serve as the public-facing principal. Howard was warm, credible, and delighted to play the role of a quiet patron of emerging creative talent. Claire pitched to Howard over coffee in Nashville. He told her she had a real gift. He told her Clearwater believed in her. He handed her a check and a simple agreement. She never asked who owned Clearwater. Nobody ever does. The agreement, drafted carefully by Patricia, included a controlling interest in Claire's firm of 55%, held by Clearwater Creative Partners, which was wholly owned by my personal trust. Claire held 40% as founder. A small operational reserve held the rest. She did not own her company. She was, in legal terms, its founder and creative director, working inside a framework built entirely by me. Then there was the studio. Claire's design firm needed a physical space, a place to meet clients, display materials, project the image of an established business. She found a beautiful ground-floor space in a renovated building in the Marble Springs neighborhood of Knoxville that was just beginning its transformation from overlooked to desirable. The asking lease was steep. She mentioned to me once, offhandedly, that she was worried the rent would strangle the business before it started. She did not know that I had purchased that building 18 months earlier through one of my holding companies. It had been a straightforward investment, undervalued commercial real estate in a neighborhood I'd watched carefully for years. My property managers reached out to Claire's firm when she inquired about the listing and offered her what they called a founding tenant incentive, a dramatically reduced lease rate for a design studio that would, quote, add creative prestige to the building's profile. Claire signed the lease and told Marcus she'd negotiated beautifully. He said he was proud of her. I read the lease copy in my study and felt nothing in particular, only the low hum of an engineer checking his calculations. And finally, Marcus himself. This is the part I am least proud of, and also the part I believe was most necessary. When Claire's firm started to grow genuinely, on the strength of her real talent, Marcus began to orbit it. He introduced himself to her clients as her strategic partner. He started attending her vendor meetings. He proposed that his consultancy be brought on retainer to manage the growth phase. His fee was $60,000 a year, billed quarterly through Claire's company, funded entirely, of course, by Clearwater, which was funded entirely by me. Marcus Webb's primary business income for the past 2 years had been a retainer paid by a company secretly owned by the man he'd spent 3 years subtly diminishing at dinner tables. The winner had been on the loser's payroll, and he had no idea. Now, back to that Sunday. After Claire and Marcus left, I sat at the table for a long time. I did not cry, though there was a moment where the photograph on the sideboard, Claire, at age 7, sitting on my shoulders at a construction site, grinning under a yellow hard hat 2 sizes too large, nearly undid me. I let myself look at it for exactly as long as it took to understand something clearly. I had made a mistake. Not in setting up the financial structure that had been sound judgment. The mistake was in letting it run too long without any accountability. I had confused protecting Claire with enabling her to build a life on a foundation she didn't know was borrowed, and I had let Marcus move into that borrowed life and treat it as proof of his own greatness. The kindest thing I had ever done was build her a runway. The kindest thing I could do now was take it away. I drove to Patricia's office Monday morning. She met me at the door with coffee before I asked for it, which meant she'd already read the tone of my weekend email. She sat beside me, not across the desk, and asked me to tell her what happened. I told her. She was quiet for a moment, then she asked me whether I was certain. She said she'd always hoped we'd never activate what we'd privately called the reset. She'd hoped Claire would eventually ask the right questions on her own. So had I. But Claire hadn't asked. She'd been too busy performing a life she believed she'd built, in a theater I'd secretly constructed for her. I told Patricia I didn't want destruction. I told her I wanted a controlled disassembly, the same way you bring down a structure that has served its purpose. You remove it carefully, in sequence, so that when the ground is bare again, the person standing on it can finally understand what solid ground feels like. Patricia nodded. She pulled up her legal files and we built a schedule. Week 1. Notify Clearwater's interest holders of a strategic restructuring. Freeze all outgoing payments from the corporate account, including Marcus's retainer. No drama, No announcement, just a quiet administrative hold, the kind that looks like a clerical issue until it becomes clear it is not. Week 2. Instruct my property management company to notify Claire's studio of a lease renegotiation, citing changed building operating costs. Present her with the new market rate lease figures, nearly 3 times what she'd been paying. Week 3. If needed, and only if needed, the final piece. I want to be clear about something, because it matters. I agonized over this. I walked the length of my backyard every evening that first week, back and forth along the fence I'd built myself, asking whether I was doing this from love or from the wounded pride of a 66-year-old man whose daughter had embarrassed him at his own dinner table, and the answer I kept arriving at was the same one. It was love. Painful, unglamorous, engineering-brained love. Because a bridge that is secretly held up by invisible supports that only one person knows about is not a bridge. It is a liability waiting to happen. Claire needed to know what she was standing on. She needed to build something real. I also want to tell you, honestly, that I had tried to do this differently, earlier. Twice in the past 3 years I had sat with Claire privately and tried to have a straightforward conversation about building real capital, about understanding her equity, about the importance of knowing every line of every agreement she signed. Both times she had smiled at me with the patient tolerance that adult children reserve for parents they've decided are out of date. The second time, Marcus had been in the next room, and she'd glanced toward the door twice while I spoke, the way people do when they're managing an inconvenience. I had been too gentle. I had asked, and been declined. Now I was going to show. Monday of the first week, I was sitting on my porch reading when Patricia confirmed the payment freeze was in place. I thought about Marcus, across town, checking his quarterly deposit that morning. I thought about the specific quality of his confusion when the number wasn't there. I felt no satisfaction. I felt the peculiar calm of an engineer who has set a process in motion and now has to wait for physics. By Wednesday, I had a message from Claire. It was careful and controlled. She was always careful when she was worried. She said there seemed to be some kind of issue with the corporate account, that her bookkeeper couldn't process payroll, that her vendors were flagged. She asked if I knew anything about Clearwater. She said it seemed strange that they'd gone silent. I did not reply that day. I let the silence do what silence does. By Friday, she called. Her voice had lost its careful control. She said Clearwater's legal office had sent a restructuring notice. She said Marcus's retainer had been suspended pending an audit of consulting deliverables. She said she was scared. She asked, "Dad, what is happening?" I told her I needed her to come to the house. I told her to come alone. The next morning she arrived at 9. She did not knock, she still had her key, which mattered to me more than I let show. She came into the study and stopped in the doorway. I had designed this room the same way I designed structures. Everything load-bearing, nothing decorative, blueprints on the walls, books organized by function, the old oak desk that had outlasted 2 offices and 1 marriage. She looked at the room the way people look at something they've always dismissed and are suddenly, unsettlingly, seeing clearly for the first time. I told her to sit down. She sat. She started to speak about Marcus, about the account freeze, about stress, and I held up one hand, not unkindly, like a man who knows the conversation will go better if it starts in the right place. I said, "Claire, before you tell me what you're worried about, I need to show you some things. And I want you to try, as hard as it is, not to react until I've shown you everything. Can you do that?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. I turned the monitor to face her. I showed her the Clearwater Creative Partners Incorporation papers first. I showed her the ownership chain, the LLC, the Delaware registration, the trust document, at the end of it with my full name. I said to her, quietly, "Clearwater is mine, Claire. It always has been." Howard Bain was a man I hired to make the introduction feel real. The $400,000 that funded your firm came from your father. She stared at the document. She shook her head slowly, the way people shake their heads when the math won't come out right. She said that wasn't possible. She said she'd been to meetings. Howard had been at the table. There had been other representatives. I said yes. All arranged. All managed through Patricia's office. Every meeting was real. The only fiction was who was sitting at the head of the table. I let that sit. Then I moved to the next document, the building lease. I showed her the deed, the ownership history. my holding company's name, clear as a beam on a blueprint. I explained when I had purchased it and why. I told her the founding tenant incentive had not been a negotiation. It had been a gift that looked like a deal because I knew she needed to believe she had won something. Her face had gone pale. She was gripping the arms of the chair. She said, "Dad," I said, "one more." And I showed her Marcus's retainer agreement, the $60,000 per year, the quarterly disbursements, the source of funds routed from Clearwater directly to his consultancy. I let her read the numbers. I let her see what strategic partner actually meant in the ledger. I said, "The man who has been telling you for 3 years that your father never built anything of consequence. His primary income for the past 2 years has come from a company your father secretly owns." The room was very quiet. I watched my daughter do the math. I watched the understanding move across her face, the way a crack moves through concrete, under stress, slowly, then all at once. She said his name. Just that, Marcus. Not a question. An arrival. And then she said, her voice different now, smaller and much older, "Did you know what he was saying to me? About you?" And I told her the truth. I said I didn't know the specific words, but I knew the shape of it. I'd recognized the pattern from the first dinner. A man who needed her to see me as small so that he could be large by comparison. And I had watched and waited and hoped she would see it on her own. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I had not expected. She said, "Why didn't you just tell me? Why did it have to be this?" And that is the question that deserved the most honest answer, so I gave it to her. I said, "I tried, Claire. Twice. And both times you looked at the door." And I understood then that I had made it too easy. That the comfortable life I'd built around you had made my voice one of the quieter sounds. So I made it louder. She started to cry. Not a performance, the real, ugly, reluctant kind that people try to stop and can't. I did not go to her immediately. I gave her 60 seconds of privacy inside her grief, because she had earned that dignity. Then I moved my chair beside hers and sat with her, not speaking. The way you sit with someone in the aftermath of a controlled demolition, when the dust is still settling and the air smells like exposed materials, and the ground underneath is finally, for the first time, completely honest. After a while, she asked me what happened now. I told her the truth about that too. Clearwater's restructuring was real. Her company's equity structure was going to be renegotiated, with her attorney present and Patricia representing my trust. And at the end of it, Claire would own a genuine majority stake, one she would understand and sign for with full knowledge. The lease would be renegotiated to a fair market rate, reduced from the original ask because I wasn't a predatory landlord, but no longer fictional either. She would have 2 years of runway at fair terms to prove the business could sustain itself. Marcus's retainer was terminated, permanently. What she did with that information about Marcus was her decision. I told her that clearly. I had no interest in her personal life beyond her happiness, and I had not done any of this to separate them. I had done it so that she would know exactly what she was choosing and who. She left 3 hours later. She did not say she forgave me. I did not ask her to. That evening I got a call from Marcus. His voice was smooth for approximately 15 seconds before it collapsed under its own weight. He said there was clearly some miscommunication, some administrative confusion, that he was certain we could work together as a family to resolve it. He said he'd always had the deepest respect for me. He said he knew how important I was to Claire. I let him finish. Then I said, "Marcus, the retainer was always discretionary. The decision has been made. I wish you well." I ended the call and set the phone face down on the desk, the same way I'd closed hundreds of project files at the end of a job cleanly, completely, without ceremony. 3 weeks later, in the parking lot of a coffee shop, Diane called me. She'd heard from Claire not the full story, but enough. She said she didn't understand why I'd been so secretive all these years, why I hadn't just been straightforward with Claire from the beginning. She said I had always done this, held everything inside, and then acted as if silence was the same as wisdom. She wasn't wrong about everything, and I told her so. I said I'd made mistakes, and I knew it. Then I said the thing I should have said in our last year of marriage. That silence was the only language I'd been taught, and I had spent the last 3 years learning to say the harder things out loud, and I wasn't finished learning yet. She didn't have a response to that. We said goodbye civilly, as we always do now. Claire called on a Thursday evening, 6 weeks after the morning in the study. I was on the back porch watching the sun drop behind the ridge, doing the thing old men in good health are lucky enough to do nothing in particular, deliberately. She said she'd met with her own attorney. She'd signed the new equity agreement and read every page twice. She said she understood her company now in a way she hadn't before, the actual structure of it, what she owned, what she owed, what the numbers meant. She said it was terrifying and clarifying at the same time. She said Marcus had moved his things out 2 weeks earlier. I did not say I was glad, even though I was. I said I was sorry it hurt, and I meant it. Then she said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She said, "Dad, I've been thinking about that picture in your study, the one of me in the yellow hard hat." She said, "I remember that day. You were explaining to me how the girders worked. You said the most important part of any structure is the part people never see. I just thought you were talking about bridges." I had to be quiet for a moment. Then I said, "I was talking about bridges, Claire." She laughed. It was small and a little sad and completely real. She said she needed to go. She said she'd come by Sunday if that was all right. I said that was all right. I set the phone down in my lap and listened to the ridge go dark and the crickets start, and I sat there in the specific peace of a man who spent his life making sure the things that mattered would not fall, and then one quiet evening finally let himself be still. I have one question for you before we go, and I want you to think about it honestly. Do you believe I did right by my daughter? Leave me a comment, 1, if you think this was the right kind of love, even if it was hard. 2, if you believe I should have been honest with her from the very beginning and that the whole structure was its own kind of deception. 3, if you think Marcus was always the real problem and Claire was just someone who got caught in a performance she didn't write. Tell me where in the world you're listening from. I'm always moved by how far a simple story travels. And if this reached something in you, if you've ever been the quiet one at a table full of noise, if you've ever held something up without anyone knowing, I'd be glad to have you here for the next one. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. That means more than you know. Sometimes the deepest love doesn't announce itself. It shows up in the invisible work, the quiet investment, the foundation nobody sees until it's gone. Raymond never stopped being a father. He just had to stop being a safety net so his daughter could discover what she was truly made of. If someone in your life has been holding things up for you in silence, maybe today is a good day to notice them and say so. A small note for you: this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of entertainment while leaving behind something worth keeping. A reminder that the quietest love is often the strongest.